Hello and welcome to episode 95 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I am, of course, your host, Sigmund Judge, and I'm joined on a spooky Hallows Eve by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee. I noticed there's no hair growing on your palms, but are you seeing any ghosts?
Not currently seeing any ghosts, Sigmund. Why do you ask?
I mean, it's almost Halloween, and I'm almost certain you're cursed, Devon. Or at least your up next picks seem to be. Let's try this out.
Well, my up next pick is...
Oh, Devon. First it was iCarly. Then it was How I Met Your Father. We'll never know. And now, the problem. What is the problem? It's definitely not with Jon Stewart. Please, don't cancel anything else. I'll see you next year.
Okay, that's definitely alarming. Well, we'll have to check in on that later, Sigmund. For now, what's happening in the world of Apple TV?
Well, on this spooky episode this week, we have scary Apple TV Plus price increases, the spooky releases for the week, and predictions for Apple's Scary Fast event on Hallows Eve. We recap Season 2 of Invasion, and we're later joined by a developer of Sequel, Roman Lafavere, to chat to us about Sequel 2.1 and the future of tracking apps. But we start this week with some major breaking news that started at Bloomberg and ended on our very own Apple TVs.
Yeah, what a week it's been for the Apple TV app itself. So earlier in the week, we got a report from Mark Gurman at Bloomberg. He spoke about a planned overhaul of the TV app to consolidate all video services under the TV app umbrella, including plans to remove the TV shows and movies app from the Apple TV and the movie and TV show sections of the iTunes Store on other devices, along with plans to redesign the TV app with a sidebar for navigation, all with the goal of making the TV app the single hub on Apple devices for streaming and purchased video content. And he mentioned in his report that he expected this update to come with tvOS 17.2 in December, but we didn't have to wait that long to see what this looked like, Sigmund, because the tvOS 17.2 Beta 1 dropped just a couple days later, and we both have it on our Apple TVs right now.
We do, but I do want to quickly mention one of the items on this reporting, which was the planned retirement of the iTunes movies and iTunes TV show apps. That, I think, set off a little bit of anxiety across the digital movie collecting forums and social media networks. So I wanted to talk very quickly about the things that the iTunes movies and TV show apps do better than the TV app right now. The first is wish lists, a feature that hasn't come to the TV app as of yet. Number counts for every genre category is something that is specific to the movies app, alongside correctly displaying the resolution of the film you own rather than the highest resolution that's available, which is what the TV app does. The other things I like about it also, it's very easy to navigate and find something because the genres are separated by 10 main genres. And also, from a purchasing perspective, for TV shows, you can actually buy complete box sets for TV shows, whereas those purchase options simply aren't available in the TV app. So that is maybe a couple of concerns. And the other thing that I think that the iTunes app has done really well in the past and continues to do really well is have that user interaction with its community, right? You've got ratings and you've got reviews, which currently don't exist in the TV app. And I think it'd be sad to see that go as well, because that's where a lot of the feedback for some of the collections and the box set issues actually get unearthed. So there's some faults there. Now, on Thursday night, admittedly, I was having a late afternoon, early evening nap, and I got a text message from you saying, the 17.2 beta is out. Might be worth downloading.
Yeah, those are some interesting tidbits about the movies and TV apps. I haven't spent a ton of time with those on Apple TV in a while, so I appreciate you sharing kind of what makes those special. And we'll be keeping an eye on what happens with those features as the betas continue to come out. Right now, those apps are still in the first beta. So at least that aspect of this restructuring and redesign has not occurred yet, but we'll, of course, keep tracking that. But for now, Sigmund, let's talk about this redesigned TV app and what it's like to use it. What were your first impressions, and give us a little overview of what's new?
Right. Now, when you get into the TV app itself, what's interesting is that top bar has gone. Instead, it's been replaced by a sidebar, which actually isn't apparent when you first launch. You have this icon in the top, and then that expands, very much like what we've seen from the likes of Netflix and Disney Plus, with how their sidebar navigation begins. And this is different to, I guess, what we were maybe expecting based on what we have on iOS and iPadOS, where you can decide whether the sidebar is always present. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in a moment on why I think that may be an issue. But what I really like about this is, first off, you have an indication right at the top of the user signed in with their profile picture and their name alongside the time, which I love the addition of these digital clocks now in tvOS. Below that, you have search, Apple TV Plus, MOS Season Pass, the sports section, the store section, and your library. And below that, you have a new space for channels and apps that integrate with the TV app. And the lovely thing about this is, initially, everything that's installed has been paired with the TV app on your profile will show. But the great thing is, you can actually highlight that specific service or app, hold down, and you have the option to hide that service or app from that sidebar navigation. Now, the only time that will ever show up again is if you reuse that app on that profile. The nice thing is we're starting to get that customization with regard to navigation on Apple TV. Maybe not in the way that we envisioned, because we talked last year, I think, maybe even more recently, about the idea of a personalized home screen. This isn't that, but it's a step towards it. So I think this is really, really cool. What were your first thoughts with this new navigation system? Do you like the overlay design, or would you have much preferred, like myself, a permanent sidebar, or just that separation when you bring the sidebar in?
I was impressed with it the first time I saw it. It does look pretty futuristic, kind of like an ornament on Vision OS, but of course the difference there is that you can't go outside the window, so it's actually going over the content. It's an interesting decision. I personally think it's going to work for me. It takes a little bit of getting used to remember exactly how to get into that sidebar and find what you're looking for, and then the sidebar goes away. But I like the fact that when you're not navigating the sidebar, the content really fills the whole screen. What you're viewing, it's all there and it's front and center, rather than having space on the screen for navigation. So personally, I enjoy the fact that it comes in and out, but I could definitely see how that could be confusing for some, or it might be annoying to have to navigate to the sidebar every time. So I think maybe having the option to have it permanent would be cool. But personally, I think I'm probably going to stick with it floating if I can continue to do that.
I think you make great points. One thing I will say that I love on the sidebar is the shortcuts that are now enabled for these different services to be able to get into their siloed up next queues and their screens. These are integrations that have been in the TV app for a while, but they've been so hidden that it's so nice to see the people behind those integrations finally getting their plaudits. Now, for you and I think we're perfectly happy with this new navigation. The customization, as we said, great. Where I think there may be an issue is you have quite a dense amount of information in that new sidebar navigation. I worry if you're maybe on a smaller screen, or if you're further away, for example, and the TV is on the other side of your room compared to where your couch is, that you may struggle with the navigation from so far away. especially if your eyesight isn't tip-top. That's something that I think could hopefully be worked on. Maybe there is a way of being able to make the text larger. Maybe there is a way of having that permanent sidebar. Unfortunately, what it seems to be is a continuation of this trend to pack as much information in these navigations as you can. I see this with just the EPGs now on like cable and satellite, far more dense than they were before. And that is something that tvOS has begun to do and continues to in this new TV app. The library section, for example, we've gone from 3 tiles to 4 now in the purchase libraries, which is really cool. I love it. There isn't much with regard to editions. So, for example, in library, you have new genre icons per genre. They're lovely. However, one of the benefits I said about the iTunes Movies app was that there was like 10 defined genres. In the TV app, there's 25. And I think that's 15 too many, in all honesty. By offering so many different categories and genres, Apple are confusing the content owners, right? As to, okay, what do I categorize this as? Like David Byrne's Utopia is classed as a musical, but really it's a live concert. Music has 3 categories on its own: musicals, musical documentaries, and musical feature films. It's just too much, right? There's non-fiction, and then there's non-fiction and reality as well. Now, in addition, there's a couple of extra things in the TV app that have changed as of this developer beta 1, which I think is important to note. It's the first developer beta. The new store tab is a combination now of both TV and movies, starting with that preview carousel on top, continuing with the first 2 rows being your top movies chart and your top TV shows chart. And of course, you have rows for recommendations of new episodes and new films as well. But you also have the For You row in that section now, 4 rows down, which is probably still a little bit too buried. I'd like to see some of these features have the option of being able to join this new navigation bar that we've got. And maybe we could have some extra customization. For example, having your most used apps and services rather than alphabetical, and being able to change that up a little bit. But I'm sure these things will come. I guess my question is, and there has been a lot of theory that we've discussed previously that has re-emerged with the debut of this new navigation bar. Does the home screen have much of a future on Apple TV?
Yeah, my first impression when I saw the new sidebar, especially that channels and apps section, was, okay, well, I'm not going to be going to my home screen anymore because I've got all my apps right here in this sidebar. But, of course, that section is only for streaming apps and, importantly, only for streaming apps that integrate with the TV app. There are still some things that aren't included in that sidebar, not only on the streaming side, but also, of course, your Apple Arcade games, any other games that you've downloaded from the App Store, and just other tvOS apps in general. So this is going to be, of course, the place for when you're wanting to watch video. This is the place you go. For anything else or for apps that don't integrate with the TV app, you're still going to have to go to that home screen. I have to say, I spent a lot of time on my tvOS home screen getting it to look just right. It's up on the big screen. I want it to be picture perfect with its folders and arrangement and everything. I use it, of course, to play games and stuff. So I don't see it going anywhere, honestly. I think probably what this could do, though, is it could open up the home screen to not have to be as focused on the streaming apps. I could see myself putting a lot of those into a folder and kind of tucking them away and making the games and the other apps on tvOS more prominent on the home screen. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of my persistent wishes is widgets on tvOS home screen. It would make room for those as well. But for now, the home screen lives on. This new sidebar in the TV app, I think, is going to replace a lot of, at least my use of those apps that integrate with the TV app. I'll be going to that sidebar instead.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. A couple of things very quickly. Not all apps are working in this developer beta. If you're wanting an extended first look at the new features, we'll leave a link in show notes to a thread that I posted on X with all of my findings so far on dedicated hardware, so that I'm not ruining the TV experience for the rest of my household. We'll also be leaving some notes on some feedbacks that I'm filing early that will need your support. You know, Apple TV gets very little coverage, as we know. This is the reason why this podcast exists. And it really is up to us as a collective to be heard and to improve the experience for everyone. Now is the time. That wasn't the only news this week. I think that was the fun, exciting news, because this news I'd describe as a little more spiky. What do you say?
That's definitely one way to put it, especially based on some people's reactions to the news this week. A lot of very passionate responses. Of course, we're referring to Apple's service price increases this week. Notably, Apple TV Plus going up to $9.99 per month in the US, up from $6.99 per month. Apple Arcade going up to $6.99 per month from $4.99. And Apple News Plus up to $12.99 a month, up from $9.99. Now, alongside those price increases, the Apple One bundles are also increasing as well. The individual and family plans are going up by $3 a month, and the Premier plan is going up by $5 a month. So big increases across the board. I think that's like a 40% increase for Apple TV Plus, and only a year after a previous price increase. While for Apple Arcade and Apple News Plus, these are their first price increases, at least in the US. Of course, these are never fun. It's not enjoyable to live in a world where you're subscribed to these things that are constantly going up. But of course, this is also a trend across many companies and services for different reasons, whether it be profitability, whether it be the economy, whether it be content costs, trying to increase their content output. A lot of these services are going up. I know people are really feeling it right now. I think it's making people really consider the value of these services for them and whether they need them all the time or if it's something they can turn on and off at different times. But regardless, if you're paying for these Apple services, they're going to be going up very soon.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I would have loved to have seen was some way of being able to customize your bundle of services. I am an Apple One Premier subscriber. I have been from the moment it was announced, because the savings compared to having all of the separate services are quite tremendous. One of the big elements of Apple's media services that I feel adds that little extra value to me is that I'm able to share it with up to 5 family members, which if I was tight and got everyone to split equally, that brings down the price incredibly. Now, this is something that separates Apple's media offerings compared to everyone else, right? This is in the era where Disney Plus and Netflix are trying to stop password sharing, whereas Apple really built family sharing in from the get-go. And I think that was really forward-thinking of them. Now we've given the plaudits, let's talk a little bit about this $9.99 increase. I think $4.99, which is what Apple started off at, was just because there was only like 4 TV shows and a documentary on elephants when it launched. To me, that made a lot of sense. And also, you got a 3-year subscription when you purchased an iPhone or a MacBook or an Apple TV even. You know, when you look at the history of Apple TV Plus, I think it's been quite fair to this point. Now, I look at the shows that we've talked about in the past and the films, and this library, as small as it might be in comparison to some other catalogues from the likes of Paramount and Netflix, the catalogue is really impressive. And I think for $9.99 a month, and keep in mind you can make it even cheaper by going annually, saving yourself $20, I think, over the year. I think that's a good deal. At this time where everyone is raising their prices, $9.99 is still the cheapest of the services when it comes to premium subscriptions. Now, of course, Apple does not yet offer an ad-based tier, but we know, based on tvOS 16, they have the ability to place adverts within their original content and third parties as well. Is this the step towards an ad-based tier possibly coming in the future?
I definitely think that's a possibility. These streaming services, when they launched, were trying to get as big of audiences as possible, which kind of led to a drive to the bottom when it comes to pricing, almost like what happened with the App Store and developers. And so now these companies are looking at how to become more profitable, and they're jacking up their prices. But what a lot of the services are doing as well is trying to make that mass appeal cheaper tier and then adding advertising in to complement the subscription price as well. And what Netflix and Disney have found is that this is actually better for their bottom line to have someone who's paying the subscription and getting advertising than for someone who's just paying for the premium tier. I could definitely see Apple getting into this. I think they'd probably be pretty selective with who they advertise with, because they are pretty protective of this content. Apple Originals are, as you said, a very prestige and high quality library. And so it's not something that you want to see, hamburger commercials maybe or something like that. I definitely think people would want to advertise against Apple TV Plus, and I think there are consumers who would be willing to sit through advertisements to save maybe $5 a month in order to watch the latest season of For All Mankind without having to spend $10 a month. I could definitely see this becoming a thing.
Now, when we first started the show notes this week, and there have been a number of adjustments, Devin, haven't there?
Yes.
The big topic of the week, problem with Jon Stewart, will no longer be on Apple TV Plus. And I wonder if advertising and a possible future advertising tier could have had some impact on this decision. Tell me a little bit about this. I know you were a big fan of the problem with Jon Stewart.
Yeah, I'm disappointed by this news. It's sad that the show's not coming back. But it is very interesting to follow the story as it's played out, because it started off, I think, when it was initially revealed, it seemed like this very dramatic clash, right, between Jon Stewart and Apple. And maybe it turns out that it hasn't been quite as dramatic as we thought. How it was originally reported was that Jon Stewart has chosen not to continue producing the problem due to creative differences with Apple. The New York Times reported that he and the company had disagreements over plans to cover AI and China in upcoming episodes of the show. And rather than get into some kind of agreement or feeling like he was limited on his subject matter, Jon Stewart just decided to end the series and walk away. I don't know that this necessarily has to mean there's bad blood between anybody or anything like that, other than the viewers who, of course, are sad, but, we'll be looking out for whatever Jon Stewart does next. It is interesting to think of this in light of advertising. If Apple's looking to bring in advertisers for Apple TV Plus for a lower tier, what kind of advertisers are they bringing in, and what kind of content are they looking to advertise against? And, of course, Jon Stewart, he's not afraid to push the agenda, to, be very provocative, really passionate about what he believes in, which is one thing I appreciated about the show for sure. But, obviously that can lead to problems sometimes. I'm sure there were a lot of different things, a lot of different people that went into this decision, but here we are. No more problem with Jon Stewart. And unfortunately, no more problem with Jon Stewart podcasts, which is something I know you and I both really enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, this I think was the element of the show that I enjoyed the most, because I much prefer the long form conversation type when it comes to political talk, because I think it's really important to kind of hear the thoughts of someone unedited and really get a grasp of what they're about. And you may have your minds changed based on what you hear. And I think that's really important, right? The world is so divided, and I am not looking forward to the next US election, because I know what kind of impact that has on social media, even for people that aren't necessarily intrinsically linked with the US from a political or cultural perspective. I think that may have been one of the bigger issues when it comes to Apple TV and wanting to stay neutral. I'm sad about the podcast going. I have to be honest. I'm not a big fan of the old network political talk shows that are 45 minutes and edited, especially in a time of VOD and streaming, where we can tune into 3-hour conversations of people that don't necessarily agree with one another. That's kind of where I am. I'm sad that the podcast is going to go, but the problem with Jon Stewart is no longer. Now, from one talk show host, Jon Stewart, to Gerardo Rivera, or should I say Ted Lasso? Tell us about this new and I think late collaboration between Mattel and Ted Lasso.
Yeah, Mattel have released Barbie signature dolls of 3 beloved characters from the world of Apple TV Plus, that being Ted Lasso, Rebecca Welton, and Keely Jones. These look awesome to me. I agree with you. It's kind of late in the game. You know, season 3's been out for a while, but maybe that's just how Barbie does things. Maybe they take their time. Regardless, I'm really happy to see these characters commemorated in this way. This is, a culturally important thing. It's pretty cool to see, and I know a lot of people are going to be very excited to add these to their Ted Lasso collections alongside the Funko Pops and everything else that they put out related to Ted Lasso.
What do you think about the actual likeness of Ted Lasso? Am I close in what I'm saying? This looks more like Gerardo Rivera than Ted Lasso.
I think that mustache is just hard to translate to a miniature figure. The hair is interesting too. It seems a little bit longer maybe than Jason Sudeikis' hair, but again, it's like you've got to accentuate the features a little bit. Every adaptation is a little bit different. So I get Ted Lasso, but I could definitely see where you're getting Geraldo Rivera as well.
When it comes to other Apple original Barbies that we might want to see, I'm just going to say it straight away. Severance, right? I want Severance Barbies. I think they would be amazing. I'd imagine you're probably going a different direction.
First of all, you've got me thinking of Adam Scott on Parks and Recreation doing his stop motion bit.
Yes!
But if we could do that with Severance, I think that'd be amazing. I would love to see Barbie dolls of Dickinson. I think that would fit really well with Barbie's goals of female empowerment. And also you get a period piece element there, which I think, you could sell some extra accessories that way. The other thing I would love to see is sets of the 2 seasons of Schmigadoon. Those characters are so iconic in my mind, the costuming and everything. I think that could be a really fun set. Be for a very specific set of people, but if they could market it to the musical lovers, I think they could sell quite a few of those as well.
Last year we saw Guillermo del Toro being accompanied by a miniature Pinocchio when he was on the red carpet promoting that Pinocchio film for Netflix. Now, last week you went to see Killers of the Flower Moon, theatrical experience, something I wasn't too sure if you were going to have time to fit in. I'm so glad you managed to. So, did you take a miniature Ted Lasso with you? And what were your thoughts on the film generally?
Well, thanks to getting a surprise half day off work and a very understanding wife, I was able to break away to the movie theaters. I went in with nothing but a bottle of water that I sipped very slowly because, it's not a short film and I'm not great at sitting for that long without a bathroom break, but I made it through the film and the credits without getting up, which I consider that a personal accomplishment. The film itself was a masterpiece, just incredible, very hard to watch. I struggle watching things that are based on true events. It just breaks my heart, these things that really happen to real people. And the fact that this was happening on such a big scale, even away from the violence, just the financial control that these people were being put under, that one of the very first scenes is Lily Gladstone's character trying to get money to pay for a medical procedure and having to go through somebody else to access her own funds. Just heartbreaking. But she was the breakout star, I think, of this film. Just an incredible performance. Understated in a lot of ways, but just so powerful in what she was communicating. The things that she goes throughout the film, the way she's piecing things together, the atrocities that she's experiencing in her own family, but also in her own personal life and marriage. It's just incredible. So yes, this film is powerful. I resonate with so many things that you said, Sigmund, when you spoke about your experience getting to see it at the film festival. it's one that's so worth seeing to remember the history, to remind ourselves of the capabilities of human cruelty, and to hopefully learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them. I'm definitely glad I got to see it in the theater, and I'm excited to get to see it again when it comes out on Apple TV+.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm so glad you got to check this out on the big screen, which I think is a film that needs to be seen on the big screen, and I'm not the only one. Killers of the Flower Moon opened as Scorsese's third best box office opening, taking $23 million in its opening weekend in the US, following Shutter Island at $41 million in 2010 and The Departed at $26.9 million in 2006. Now, of course, our movie-going habits have changed in that time, and we are still going through a protracted strike by SAG-AFTRA, which means that no actors could really get involved in the promotion of this film. So all of those things, I think, need to be taken into account. You can, of course, add $21 million from opening weekend ticket sales overseas. They include the top market being the UK, with $3 million at 701 cinemas, the widest release for a Scorsese film in the country. Then we have France, which grossed $2.6 million across 528 locations. Germany, which did $1.6 million at 420 cinemas. And Australia, which brought in $1.4 million from 314. In IMAX, the take was $5.1 million global, including $1.75 million overseas, with many markets performing well above their typical percentage of national totals. And the most impressive fact here, amongst all of the figures, was that Killers of the Flower Moon also reeled in more young moviegoers than one might have expected, Paramount stating that 44% of ticket buyers were under the age of 30, which I think is absolutely fantastic for the future of cinema. That could also convert into many vinyl sales from hipsters, including myself. Robbie Robertson's final score will be available in mid-December through Sony. We'll have a link in the show notes for pre-orders. Of course, Napoleon will be my next IMAX screening next month, but there's been many different reasons in recent weeks to head over to the big screen. The recent strikes meant that we've seen some big losses to the end of year schedule, and that has led to cinemas across the globe diversifying what they exhibit and project on the big screen. And that is a transition to a little bit of Taylor Swift talk, which is not what I expected this week.
Yeah, we don't talk about Taylor Swift much on the show, but we have to highlight the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, which brought in $178.8 million in the box office worldwide. Just an astronomical amount of money for a concert film that no one even really saw coming. Pretty incredible the way that she got this thing filmed and turned around so quickly and into theaters, kind of doing it all on her own, which is really cool to see. There's a rumor that we could see the Eras Tour film coming to Apple TV Plus in the not too distant future. There are several streamers, I think, that are currently vying for rights to it. It's going to be a big get for whoever does get it, but I've got my fingers crossed. Of course, Apple and Taylor Swift have a working relationship. They've gone back many, many years working together. And so if they could make this deal happen, I would love to see it. I think it'd be an amazing addition to the service and bring in a whole different group of people who have maybe not given Apple TV Plus a try just yet.
And if this release was to happen, Devon, it would no doubt happen in January, which is just a month before Taylor Swift is supposedly making an appearance on Apple TV Plus via Argyle. This theory is almost so loopy that I'm almost ready to believe it.
Yeah, this is a conspiracy theory that's taking Swifties by storm right now. And it's really cool to see. I didn't really imagine this kind of Apple TV Plus Taylor Swift crossover happening, but a good group of Taylor Swift fans are absolutely convinced that she is the author behind the book that inspired Apple original film Argyle. Now, if you read the press releases for Argylle, you will see that it is allegedly based on a book by Ellie Conway, who is an author that we know nothing about. There's no history on her. The only social media presence that exists for her is this Instagram account with a few pictures and mundane captions of different things that she's doing, going to bookshops and coffee shops and things like that. And so people have been wondering ever since the movie was announced, who is Ellie Conway? Or is Ellie Conway a person, or is she just like a part of the promotional material for the film? Because if you'll watch the trailer for Argylle, you'll notice that Bryce Dallas Howard's character is named Ellie Conway. She writes the book within the film that sets off the events. But what Taylor Swift fans have come up with is that Ellie Conway is real, and it's a pen name for Taylor Swift herself. And so they're analyzing every Instagram photo on Ellie Conway's profile and trying to find little references to different things that Taylor Swift does, parts of her history, even the numbers and the dates of her posts and the release dates for her book. They're reading into this and seeing how it lines up with some of Taylor's other clues that she's given out. She does like to, throw up mysteries and tie her releases to special dates within her life and special numbers and things like that. I don't know for sure if this is leading to some kind of big reveal that Taylor Swift's an author now and she's written this book that's being adapted to an Apple original film, or if it's just maybe some people seeing connections that aren't quite there, or if it's the marketing team for the film maybe trying to drum up a little bit extra excitement, throwing in some tidbits. Who knows? Maybe Taylor Swift will at least appear on the soundtrack. If this helps them sell tickets in February for Argylle, then I'm happy with it no matter what.
February isn't far away, but reeling back a little bit, a few months, we have some announcements for a holiday slate of Apple originals that was announced earlier this week, beginning with a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving celebrating its 50th anniversary, free for all to stream on November 18th and 19th. Alongside, on November 22nd, the Hannah Waddingham Home for Christmas special, The Velveteen Rabbit, which is based on the classic book by Marjorie Williams, and The Making of Spirited, which is a documentary on the making of the holiday classic, Devon. On December 1st, we'll also see a sing-along version alongside Frog and Toad Christmas Eve, Shape Island The Winter Blues, The Snoopy Show Happiness is Holiday Traditions, and A Charlie Brown Christmas, again free for all to stream December 16th and 17th, and finally Sargo Mini Friends New Year's Steve on December 22nd. Let's rewind a second. A holiday classic is Spirited. I think we both had a lot of fun with the film. Is that going maybe a tad too far?
Well, the film's a year old. I think the jury's still out if it's going to be a classic or not, but I am definitely interested in this sing-along version because I need to learn all the lyrics to Good Afternoon. And so I'm just going to loop that one for a while until I get it all down. I do think that the film was a huge success last year. It really did help a lot of people get into the holiday spirit, and so it's cool to see them kind of keeping it at the forefront of their holiday slate. This whole lineup looks wonderful. I especially love the Charlie Brown specials. Of course, they're available anytime for Apple TV Plus subscribers, but the fact that they make them free for anybody to stream around those holidays, I think is very generous and a wonderful way for people to get into the holiday spirit with these films that they've come to love over many, many decades. Now, moving on from the holidays, there are some other Apple originals that are coming. Of course, Apple's constantly looking into rights to different things that can be added to the library, different things that can be adapted, and some sleuths on Reddit keep an eye on the U.S. copyright database for different things that Apple acquires. And this week, we saw a couple of notable additions. Apple have acquired the rights to Israeli series The Chef from Yes Studios. The series follows Nimrod, an unemployed high-tech worker who starts working in the kitchen of a prestigious restaurant run by Dory, a brilliant chef struggling to stay relevant and keep his place at the top of the ultra-competitive gastronomic world. Now, a second season of this series is in the works, so we could see the first season come to Apple TV Plus, and then the second season actually be released as an Apple original. We don't know for sure, but we know that Apple have acquired the rights at least. Also filed this week in the database is news that Apple have acquired the rights to the animated preschool series Wonder Pets, which originally aired on Nickelodeon several years ago. This is an older series, but we have seen Apple bring things into the library before that are older. Sometimes they'll do that when they reinvent something and bring it back. So maybe we could see new Wonder Pets coming to Apple TV Plus in addition to the original series. I don't know. Either way, Apple's buying up some interesting rights, and we'll keep an eye out for any news on these productions.
On top of all of that, Apple this week announced that three-part documentary series Lennon, Murder Without a Trial, narrated by Kiefer Sutherland of all people, will be coming to Apple TV Plus. For the first time, key figures from John Lennon's life and death, including friends, doctors and investigators, share personal memories and reveal what happened on the night of his killing. There is no release date as of yet for that limited documentary series, or I should mention Palm Royale, which I'm very, very much looking forward to checking out. We'll, of course, be tracking both titles, and you'll know all about those release dates as and when they are announced.
But first, coming to the Apple TV is WebEx, according to Cisco's announcement this week with, of course, support for continuity camera. We don't have an exact release date, but we will be able to make WebEx calls from our Apple TVs soon. One app that we've covered a lot on the show is Sequel. It's one of our favorite media tracking apps. I know it's one that you and I use every day. And this week we are honored to be joined by the developer of Sequel, Roman, as he releases Sequel 2.1. Roman, welcome to the show and congratulations on the release.
Hey, Devin. Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into all the details of 2.1, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about what it's like being an indie developer and making Sequel each and every day.
It's an interesting one because I think a lot of people have a romantic view of what it is to be an indie developer, right? You set your own work schedule, your own boss, you get to express your own vision. And to be honest, like most importantly for me, you're very close to your users, right? Like I reply to every single email I get. I get to really interact with the people who use the app. And that's not something I've always had in past experiences, but there is definitely downsides, which is, you don't have a team, like you're on your own. And it's very different. Coming into it, I thought, well, how hard can it be? I've been working from home. I like it, which I know is not the case for most people. But the difference I hadn't really anticipated is that you're completely on your own, right? If you have a problem, it's on you. And, if you're stuck, it's on you. There's no one essentially that's trying to achieve the same goal. But on the whole, it's been a fun ride so far.
You talked about problems. Let's talk about the problem you tried to solve with Sequel in the first place. Because as someone that has loved using this app for tracking my shows and my movies predominantly, of course, Sequel can do a lot more than that. Tell me about the problem that you were trying to solve with the launch and the idea of Sequel in the first place.
Sequel, interestingly enough, started nearly 10 years ago, where I was fresh out of uni and I wanted a project to sink my teeth in, so to speak. And I sort of landed on a movie tracker because I could never remember when my movie came out, the stuff I was really excited to see. And I was an avid consumer of trailers. I just love a good, well-paced trailer. And I was like, I could make an app that reminds me of when my movies come out. And that would allow me to track my trailers. You're a student fresh out of uni and you've got to find a job. And I had a few prototypes, but that project didn't really go anywhere, right? And then you fast forward a fair few years. With the advent of streaming services as well in the recent years, you start so many TV shows and you don't really know when they're coming back unless you're, like you guys, you're just living and breathing in that news cycle. And I thought to myself, these are all the same problems. I can't keep track of the things I do to entertain myself. And that's when I thought, well, let me look around. Let me try to use media trackers out there and use other applications that are dedicated to tracking movies or tracking games. And they're all fantastic in their own right. But the thing that wasn't really working for me is that sort of disconnect. All the experiences were siloed and they all work slightly differently. And I thought to myself, there needs to be a solution that just works the same, regardless of whether I want to watch a movie or play a game or read a book, because ultimately this is the same problem. I just want to entertain myself. And that's really where SQL came from. And it was also just a fun challenge. I'm a product designer by trade, and just this idea of how you merge these different entertainment types into a single place that feels familiar regardless of what you want to do. That's where SQL came from.
Let's get to SQL 2.1, though, which came out this past week. Give us just the top-level highlights of what is new in this release.
So in SQL 2.1, the headlining feature really is tracked synchronization. This is by far the most requested feature from SQL users. And understandably, right when you're passionate about movies and TV shows, chances are you're tracking them already somewhere else. And one of the most popular services is tracked. And so when it comes to adopting a new media tracker, well, you don't really want to be starting from scratch, right? Especially because Tracked is an open service that can integrate with other services and apps. And why would I use an app that doesn't support it? In just a few taps, you can synchronize your account and get all of the years of tracked activity ready, consumable in SQL. There's a few other quality of life improvements as well. The first one is enhanced cast and crew experience. And it's really a suite of new features and additions. The first one, which feels an important gap in SQL, is that you can now see the directors for your movies, which you couldn't do before, which wasn't an oversight. It was a lack of time because the vision I had was a lot bigger than what I could realistically do in time for 2.0. That also comes with a fairly comprehensive view at the entire crew of a movie and a TV show. So you can see everything from writers to composers and really any crew member. You can filter them by role or by name if you're looking for something really specific. And on top of that, you can now see the filmography of any crew member as well. So the first version, well, I guess the second version of SQL was limited to only seeing the filmography of actors. But now you can see the filmography of your favorite director, for example, which incidentally has also seen a fair few enhancements as well. So this screen, the filmography screen, now features more details like date of birth, biography, what an actor and director is known for, and also other roles that they may have played. Some directors enjoy being part of the cast of a movie sometimes, little cameos. And so you could find these on that screen. Certain actors also contribute as directors or producers of other movies. And so that's all there in SQL now. And there is a bunch of quality of life improvements. You've got new spoiler settings so that you can hide episodes, previews, and titles until you've actually marked them as watched, which has been highly requested. And one interesting one as well, which came to me as a suggestion from a user, which is average ratings as well. And I thought this was a very clever one because sometimes you don't want to be spoiled by the average sentiment on a particular movie, right? You want to come into it without necessarily knowing if people have enjoyed it or not, and coming to it fresh and making your own opinion of the piece without having any pre-opinions, if you will. So yeah, I think that sort of wraps up 2.1. There is quite a few other smaller improvements across the board as well, but these are really, I think, the three tentpole features: tracked sync, an enhanced cast and crew experience, and spoiler settings.
I got to say, for a point update, this is quite an update, Roman. Many congratulations. Devon and I have had such a blast going through the process of beta testing, and which was an open beta. Lots of people helping out and giving feedback. I think it had over 2,000 testers, which their feedback is paramount really to what you develop further. So now that we're out of beta season, and there will be people that I'm sure listening that were beta testers and are now transitioning back to the live app. Can you tell me about the benefits of SQL Plus and how, first off, that helps as a developer, a lone developer at that, and what you get back as a user as well on a feature level?
Well, I think the most obvious one in that regard is track synchronization, right? This is a paid feature in SQL Plus. Now, the interesting thing, however, is that SQL Plus yearly plan comes with 2 weeks free. So you can take the trial, import your data, and if it's not quite for you, or if you're not quite ready to pay for it, it's okay. You can, let the trial elapse and still retain your data. It won't sync with Tracked anymore beyond that point, but this is one of the benefits because it's really a power user feature and not one that most users necessarily require. And so for me, when thinking about what I put in SQL Plus is what do most users need in order to keep track of their entertainment. And all of that is going to go in the free version. And anything that is a power user feature or a nice to have or a convenience will usually go in SQL Plus. This is what brings your experience to the next level. And so on top of Tracked Sync, you're getting all of the previous SQL Plus features, including where to watch details. So you'll know immediately if something is available on Netflix, with some new features in that regard as well in 2.1, where you can change the region that the app uses to show you your services. So I know, Sigmund, you asked for this, which may have had something to do with me including it in the app, but you can now say, for example, if you're subscribing mostly in the US, for example, you could just set your region to the United States and SQL will just show you everything that's available there, essentially. Other features range from more powerful widgets, like the countdown widgets and the upcoming and recently released widgets. You also have benefits for gamers as well that can see how long a game takes to complete. So if you want to make sure you're spending your time wisely, you might want to check this out because many games these days just last 90, 100, 150 hours and don't always have time for that.
I got to say, one of the things that I really love about your app is collections. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful. We talked earlier on in this episode about price increases for different streaming services and the idea of churn becoming more of a reality across the mainstream viewer. Being able to basically parcel everything and put them in a collection specific to a service, ready, I guess, to have a backlog when you're ready to rejoin that service, I think is probably one of the underlooked features of your app. I think that's going to help in a big, big way as well with saving money over the course of the year.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting? SQL has been out for a year and a half now. And as the app grows, I am getting more and more requests for, can your app please help me know what's available in the services I own? Because people are doing exactly what you're describing. They're churning and only subscribing to a given service when they actually have enough to watch on it. They don't subscribe for infinite amount of time anymore. And maybe I'll give you a little teaser to what I've got in mind for future updates. Now, I don't want to quite commit to anything, but there is some cool ideas I have in regards to collection where they could potentially automatically set their content based on some predefined filters. So you might be able to say, this is the Netflix collection. Just show me everything that is on Netflix. I've not started on this feature. I don't know how possible it will be, but this is something I am actually quite excited about, and the possibilities of these are just kind of getting my head reeling. So watch out.
Well, that's a glimpse to the future of SQL. I wanted to have a bit of an open conversation on the future of tracking apps, because, as you mentioned right at the beginning, SQL is one of many tracking apps that do specific things. I wanted to talk about the idea of a tracking app like yours becoming not so much a siloed secondary experience to the movie and TV viewing experience, but actually becoming more embedded in the navigational experience of, say, tvOS. We've seen just this week the direction in which the TV app is going with the sidebar. One of my criticisms is the smaller logos on the side and everything being quite dense, which means that if you're a little bit further away from a television screen, you may find, and it's not just the TV app, it's Netflix, Disney, everyone, you may find, if you've got sight issues or whatever else, that isn't actually the experience you want. And what I've noticed, for example, my grandparents, they've got used to using an iPad or an iPhone, tapping those icons on their personal screens. And I wonder if that is the future in which we will navigate our TV rather than having a separate remote. And knowing that there are some APIs open to developers to be able to make those connections and to do deep linking, I was interested if an app like SQL could actually eventually change the way in which we interact with television as a whole.
I really like the direction that you're going with this, Sigmund, the train of thought. It really resonates with me as someone who cares very deeply about the shows and films, especially that I watch, and keeping up with everything. It is not quite an ideal experience having to remember to go back and log things after the fact. Sometimes I'll even like hit play on something and then I'll log it, but then I will have to pause it in the middle. And it's like, you know, it's kind of in this weird kind of limbo state in my mind, and it causes a little bit of cognitive dissonance for me. I would love a way to kind of tie those things together a little bit more, and to do it all on my personal device, which I'm used to now. You know, I do most of my tracking on my iPhone, even though I do most of my watching on the Apple TV. So to be able to tie those together a little bit more, I think that'd be amazing. To be able to go into a tracking app, go to my Up Next queue there, tap on the episode and have it play on the TV and then marked as watched in my tracker and make it all one seamless experience. I think that would be very cool. We've seen some things kind of like this. I know we've talked about Marcos Tanaka's Play, which can save titles from the TV app and then launch them later. I know most of these apps on the Apple TV have deep links to their titles. And so I guess it would be a matter of figuring out how to integrate with that on like a massive scale. We're making it work with every title. But I would love to see that. I think it would be something that would resonate with a lot of people. And as you said, make it accessible to people for whom maybe this whole smart TV trying to navigate with a remote thing is just not quite working.
Yeah. You both make very interesting points. And I think it basically comes down to a disconnect between where you track and where you consume, right? When you boil it down, is probably a desire for tracking apps to focus on what they are meant to do, which is tracking. And when you think about tracking, you know, SQL does essentially 3 different groups of entertainment. And for each of them, there is a plethora of things that people may want to do and consume just from a tracking perspective, right? Like, how do I make a decision whether or not I want to track something? And then how does the app help me decide whether or not I want to watch something when I'm ready to do it? And so just from the tracking perspective, there's already so much you have to do. And the interesting thing when I look around in the tracking app landscape is that a lot of these applications are made by indie developers, right? They're single person teams. And so by the time you've actually achieved all of this, it's already kind of been a while, right? But you're right, like ultimately that disconnect exists. And I think it's important to ask ourselves the question, you know, what is actually the end goal we're trying to do? Like, I don't think a tracking app is just about tracking, because tracking itself is enjoyable for a certain group of people, but like we can do so much more, because the alternative is that you open Netflix and you just press play on the first thing that they show you, because that's easy. But that's not necessarily the best way of spending your free time. And that's certainly something I'm always thinking of when I'm working on SQL, is like, how do I help you spend your free time more efficiently? You know, that's why I'm combining everything into one app, because you might not necessarily want to watch a movie. Maybe you want to enjoy a video game, or maybe you want to watch a TV show. And so the more we can do to bridge this gap, the better. Now, there are APIs, but the reality of things is that these APIs are very limited. When you take Just Watch, for example, that does provide you with where to watch data to tell you if a movie is available on Apple TV. They don't give you deep links. They give you a link to their website so they can get the attribution of what you've just watched. And then they send you to Apple TV or Netflix. This data is precious for many people. And so I think there is a certain control that, let's say, the powers that be want to retain on that data, and probably rightfully so, right? And so I think it's down to us to sort of think about, you and I, Sigmund, have had long conversations on, well, how could we, let's assume we can do it. How could we do it? And I'm not sure I necessarily have the answer, but it's certainly something I'd be curious to explore. I know you've mentioned a few apps that take steps towards this, but don't necessarily provide the entire picture either. I'd actually be curious, Sigmund, what are sort of standout experiences that you've seen that make progress towards bridging this gap?
So right now there isn't an app out there that really makes that full progress. At the moment, it's server-based through the likes of Home Assistant and lots of time of building a database from scratch, which is something that I have been playing around with over the last few weeks. There are apps like Channels, DVR, that allow you to deep link to, for example, titles from third-party apps. And what you have to do to be able to deep link is, rather than use the TV app URL, you use the URL from the app in question. And it will go straight to that title as opposed to just to the app profile screen, like we talked about briefly at the beginning of last week's episode. So there is nothing right now that does, I guess, the idea that I'm pitching and the idea that we're all interested in. But I do think that there's something there. I don't know if it takes more than a solo indie developer to be able to do, because we're now talking about basically having to build your own database and hope that those URL strings don't change, right? Which no doubt there would be probably a fight from the content providers, because they want you to be in the app and not go just directly to their content.
Yeah.
The answer is there is nothing right now. I wonder, though, if it will take the combined efforts of developers that are developing certain apps that are similar in a lot of ways to be able to maybe build a database that they can all tie into. Of course, on a business level, your competitors, but I think there's more there, and that's probably where I'll leave it there. I think I'll leave that dangling in the air.
I think I can add a little bit of color to that, because when you look at it, there is a few fairly big companies who provide tracking-like features, let's call them. Well, it's not necessarily the main business. IMDb. They've got a plethora of data about movies and TV shows, and they don't really seem to be interested in bridging that gap, right? TV Time as well. I think they're a fairly large company, and their application is solely about really tracking, and they don't bridge that gap either. This sort of raised the question, who is more likely to A, take an interest in that problem, and B, be able to pull it off? I think the first one, you're probably right. It's probably the indie scene, but I'm not sure we're necessarily the best place to actually pull it off. Now, the one thing that comes to mind is, SQL doesn't own the database it uses. I'm using, the movie DB for TV and movies, and TV Maze, and IGDB for games, and Apple Books for books. And these, I think, are where they might be able to do something about it, right? They are, for the most part, IGDB and TMDB are crowdsourced databases. And so what I'm thinking is like, well, if it's crowdsourced, now it becomes, if not possible, at least realistic. As you said, like the process you went through is to manually curate deep link URLs for your own personal gigantic database. And so if this could be crowdsourced, then it could be possible.
Well, one company that could also be a part of this equation is Apple, right? They've got the TV app with all the deep links in it. They're providing Apple Books, which you're building the book tracking on. They provide the podcast database for different podcast app, maybe a TV database someday. For now, Roman, I'm encouraged by your outlook, and I fully trust that you're going to continue to use that outlook as you continue to develop the app. It's one that we're very happy to use and happy to support, and we hope other people will consider supporting it as well, of course, through the Sequel Plus subscription in the app, which is available for $2.99 a month or $19.99 a year. Family plans also available if everyone in your house wants to enjoy tracking as well. Roman, thanks so much for joining us, and we're very excited about the future of Sequel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, of course, Roman will be back in just a little while for his Up Next Halloween-themed pick. Let's talk about this week's releases on Apple TV. Starting with Apple Arcade, a big release this week, Devon, for the sports fans at least.
Yeah, this week saw the debut of NBA 2K24 Arcade Edition. And of course, Apple Arcade has been the exclusive home of these arcade editions for a couple of years now. It's cool to see the NBA 2K coming to iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple TV via Apple Arcade for those who enjoy these games and want to play them on all their devices, not just on home consoles. Now, this release includes My Career, where you create a player and become an NBA legend. The Association, where you get to become the general manager and head coach of your favorite team and experience the season from that point of view. There's NBA Today, where you play along with the current season, and so maybe you pick one of tonight's matchups and maybe run a scenario of what that might look like, which is kind of cool. There's also Spectator Mode, Greatest Mode, where you take on some of the greatest players in NBA history, Quick Match, and online multiplayer as well. Definitely a big get for Apple Arcade, and a lot of fun for basketball fans this weekend on Apple Arcade.
Also this weekend is MOS Season Pass, and we are now in playoff season. I will tell you, the rules of playoff season are all over the place, and as a seasoned football and soccer fan, this is a new format I'm having to learn from scratch. Now, in the show notes, we've got the whole format how it is, but reading it, it's more confusing than taking it in yourself. So we'll link it in the show notes. Of course, MOS Season Pass continues with the playoffs. Games began on Wednesday evening, and they will continue through to the MOS 2023 Cup Final, which will take place on Saturday, December 9th. Of course, you can join MOS Season Pass via our link in the show notes to watch an exciting end to the debut season on MOS Season Pass on Apple TV, and that will inadvertently help support this very podcast.
One thing you're guaranteed not to see in this tournament segment, and that's a tie. Americans hate ties. There's got to be a winner. If watching cutthroat football is not your thing, there's plenty of Apple originals to check out this weekend as well. Starting on Friday, we've got the premiere of The Enfield Poltergeist, the premiere of Curses, and a new spooky episode of Shape Island, alongside a new episode of Lessons in Chemistry and the finale of Still Up, which we'll recap next week with a very special guest.
On Monday, we'll see another episode of the Apple original podcast, Magnificent Jerk. But it's strangely time for us to talk about the next Apple event, which means that'll be midnight in the UK. Very, very strange. We're used to 10 a.m. Pacific starts. This is bang in the middle of the night for me. I'm not too sure if Apple are going with the whole spooky theme and having everything at night, or if there is a bigger reason behind this. It is, of course, though, time for our predictions. Mini predictions this time round. Bang in the middle of Up Next. We have 2 normal predictions and an out there pick. So, without further ado, Devon, what is your first prediction?
Well, based on the invitation, which gives us a spooky version of the Finder icon, everyone's thinking this is probably going to be a Mac hardware event. And in order for these updates to be big enough to actually merit an event, I think there has to be a new chip. A lot of us were thinking M3 wasn't going to come until next year, maybe even after Apple Vision Pro. But I think the fact that they're doing an event now means that there's going to be a new M3 chip. And that's going to be my first prediction.
Okay. A fairly safe pick, I think, personally. I've gone a little more out there, and I'll tell you why. Because WWDC, I didn't think gaming. We had got big gaming announcements, right? With the iPhone, we got even bigger gaming announcements with full console games coming to iPhone, one of which is expected, I think, next week. So I'm going this time with a gaming focus pick, and the main reason for that is because I feel like I've missed out, and I feel like we've all been conditioned over the years not to think of gaming and Apple in the same kind of sphere. 5 p.m. Pacific equates to 9 a.m. in Japan. With Tim Cook recently going to China to talk to gaming developers and gaming companies, I don't know how that went. Obviously, there has been a little bit of conflict behind the scenes. I think we're going to see a big partnership with a Japanese gaming developer, and maybe even the biggest in Japanese gaming beyond Nintendo, and that is Sony, who are just so happening to launch their cloud streaming service on the same day. So my first pick is that Sony PlayStation will announce some kind of partnership with Apple.
I like it. Yeah, that's very interesting, and it could help explain why the timing is so different. It's definitely inconvenient for you, people in Europe, having to stay up so late to see it, but it kind of catches a different audience that usually is left out of these live Apple events over in Japan and that part of the world. So yeah, I like this. This is very interesting. It would be very exciting, of course, for people who subscribe to the PlayStation service to be able to access it on their Apple devices and have some kind of integration there as well. Now, my second pick is one that I think a lot of people will also be excited for. Of course, last month we saw the iPhone go to USB-C and AirPods Pro going USB-C. We're still waiting for a few things to go, and that includes Mac peripherals. So I imagine that at this Mac-focused event, we're going to see USB-C Mac peripherals, including the mouse, keyboard, and trackpad. And I believe they'll be sold separately as well. They won't be bundled just with maybe a new iMac or something like that, but you'll be able to go to the Apple Store and purchase just the Magic Keyboard with a USB-C connector, which I imagine a lot of people will jump all over so they don't have to keep lightning cables around anymore.
Okay, well, this is, and I think it ties in quite well with Japan as well, right? Because I've watched many gaming keynotes or presentations, whatever you want to call them, and one thing they're not afraid of doing is dressing up, right? There's a fun element to this. And so my prediction is that we'll see one or more Apple executive dressed up for Halloween during this presentation.
Man, I would love to see it. Do you think it's going to be Tim Cook or Craig Federighi or anybody in particular you want to see?
I mean, I could see Tim Cook, maybe with the fangs, you know? Good evening rather than good morning, you know? So maybe we could go there. I don't know. But honestly, these picks, I don't know what to expect during this event at all. So these picks are all a little bit out there. But it is time for your out there pick. What have you got for us?
I'm going to take a big swing segment, and I'm going to say that this is the event where Apple decides to announce the Apple Vision Pro release date. They've said many times it's coming early next year. They're starting to get ready for training internally for people to start selling these things at Apple stores. And so I think Apple might be ready to commit to a release date and tell us when Apple Vision Pro is actually coming.
Wow. Okay. I did not see that coming at all. An Apple Vision Pro release date. I'd love to, because I think it would be a good idea for people to know how much it's going to cost and how long they've got to save if they haven't been for the last year and a half as it is. Interesting. All right, my out there pick for this event is kind of aligning with what you're saying with regard to USB-C Mac peripherals and accessories. I'm going to go with a backlit Magic Keyboard. It's been something that's been on the wish list for a long, long time. I looked at this invite and, you normally can make out something from the invite. Obviously, we got the Spooky Finder logo, which is very, very cool, and I love the animation, but there is a glowing light, and I did wonder if maybe that meant MacBooks with the backlight again, now that energy consumption's been able to go down because of the smaller chips. Maybe they can bring back the light that was lost during the Intel era, a light I miss deeply. But I think there's probably more of an opportunity for there to be a backlit Magic Keyboard, something that's been missing for a long, long time, but is a mainstay on Apple's MacBooks. That's my out there pick. Now, the title of the event is Scary Fast. How scary and how fast do we predict this event to be, Devon?
I'm predicting not super scary. I think it's going to be more fun than scary. And I am predicting it's going to be a pretty quick event. I think with it being this late and it being this late in the year, and I honestly don't know how many different pieces of hardware they're going to announce. I think it might be, pretty low, the number. So I'm going to guess that this event is going to be nice and short at 15 minutes.
I like it. I think it's going to be short. I don't think it's going to be that short. I'm going for 34 minutes. So yeah, we're going to be setting the stopwatches as soon as the event begins. Apple's Scary Fast event happening October 30th, again at 5 p.m. Pacific, midnight UK time, 1 a.m. Central European time. Very, very much looking forward to that. Of course, following Monday's event, we have part 2 of Messi Meets America, alongside the penultimate episode of The Morning Show, both happening on Wednesday. And if that wasn't enough, Devon, we've got yet another extra this week from behind the scenes of Lessons in Chemistry.
Yeah, this is a fun little video. It's called Cast Chemistry in the Kitchen, Peanut Butter Brownies. Of course, the show has a whole cooking theme, and they've been releasing recipes and things like that to go inside with the release of the episodes. This video sees a couple of the younger cast members in the kitchen cooking peanut butter brownies. And, I think it's really fun, all this food-related content. They've been doing a lot of new stuff with Lessons in Chemistry to promote it. I don't know if you have gotten the invitation, Sigmund, but on Instagram, they've started what's called a broadcast channel for Lessons in Chemistry, where it'll DM you every time a new episode comes out. Anyway, I just love the promotion for the show. I love the show itself as well. I think it gets better and better every week. And so if you're enjoying it and want to see a little bit behind the scenes, some fun with some of the younger casts, check out this video. We'll link it in the show notes.
All right, well, a crazy week this week, but we're not finished yet, Devon, because of course, season 2 of Invasion reached its finale last week. We've had a week to let everything settle, as of course the aliens escalate their attack into an all-out war. Ordinary people across the globe pursued answers and fought for the world's survival across 10 episodes. Devon, what were your thoughts on Invasion Season 2, a show that I know you continue to love and watch?
Yeah, I'm really into Invasion. I enjoyed this season. There was a lot going on, so before I share my thoughts, I thought I'd give just a quick plot summary, of course, filled with spoilers for Season 2, for those who are sensitive to that. But just to catch everyone up on where we're at, because so much happened this season. After struggling to return to family life in Florida, Travante follows clues from Casper's notebook that lead him to a small town in Oklahoma, the site of Sheriff Tyson's disappearance at the beginning of the invasion. We're finally getting justice for Sheriff Tyson, which I'm so thankful for. He teams up with a local police administrator, Rose, to investigate a string of disappearances and the military cover-up surrounding them. Meanwhile, Jamila receives a message from Casper in a dream and sets out with a few of her old classmates to find him. The group make their way to Paris, where they discover a special hospital for children who are able to communicate with the alien invaders. Anisha, alongside her kids Luke and Sarah, takes refuge with a rebel group called the Movement after being pursued by the military for possessing an alien artifact. The military abducts Sarah, thinking she has a special connection with the aliens, and so Anisha and the group pursue her to, you guessed it, Oklahoma, and find out along the way that Luke has the ability to control the alien invaders. Meanwhile, Mitsuki joins a secretive group researching a downed alien ship under the direction of the World Defense Coalition. She's able to crack the code of the aliens' communication and bypass their cloaking technology, allowing world militaries to launch a massive attack. And when the aliens retaliate, the war comes to a head in, once again, Oklahoma. Mitsuki figures out how to open the portal at the center of the abductions, allowing Travante to go through and board the alien mothership. There he is met telepathically by Casper and sets off to bring the aliens down once and for all. So a lot happening this season. I think each episode was only able to focus on a couple of those threads at a time. And so like you'd go a couple episodes without certain people and then you'd jump back in with them. It was kind of cool the way they strung it all together. Now I will say there were a lot of people who enjoyed season 1. There were some who weren't as into it. And I would say that this season is more of what we saw in season 1. So it's not going to appeal to those who weren't into it at the beginning. That's totally fine. But for those who, like me, who enjoyed it, it's even more of that goodness, which I definitely appreciate. I will say this season seemed a little more focused than the last season, and I think that might be thanks to the locations being less spread out. The first season was very ambitious with all the different places that they filmed. They were in Japan, the Middle East, London, and of course all over the United States as well. This season they consolidated things a lot more location-wise, and of course everyone ended up in one way or another, whether physically or telepathically or in another way, ended up in this one location where everything comes to a head. And I kind of like the way they consolidated it as the season went on. I really appreciate the way the writers brought these seemingly disparate storylines together. We've been with these people now for 2 seasons, 20 episodes, really experiencing their separate journeys, but we're starting to see the main cast emerge as a team that's going to be core to humanity's survival. And we see the way that all these threads are really coming together. As the fight for humanity's survival carries on, these people are important to it, and we're starting to see why. Now, I want to know more about the special connection between all these kids and the aliens. One thing we learn in this season is that Casper is not necessarily unique. There's a whole bunch of other children around the world who also are able to communicate with the aliens in different ways. And we see them all together in this hospital where they're being studied and cared for. But we also learn that Luke, Anisha's son, seems to be one of these children as well, because he's able to control the aliens. So I want to understand more about what that connection is, why these particular people are able to do it and others aren't. Is this an alien tactic that they have, or is this some kind of weakness within their kind of hive mind that can be hacked somehow by these kids? I'd like to know.
And what I like also about this aspect is that with everyone kind of forming a network, so to speak, it almost harkens back to some like horror classics like Night of the Creeps. And so I love this. I got to say, there are some campy moments in here, Devon, that threw me a little bit, but I did overall enjoy this season. I did also have a few laughs. I mean, who would have a barbecue in the middle of an alien invasion just down the road? No doubt, Devon, we are in for a 3rd season. What do you think?
I definitely think so. Story-wise, they're definitely setting up for a 3rd season. The show seems to have made a pretty good connection with audiences based on the information that we have. No official order yet, but I imagine we'll be hearing about a season 3 of Invasion before too long. In the meantime, you can, of course, stream the first 2 seasons of Invasion now on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. Alongside everything else that we've mentioned, lots streaming on Apple TV Plus this week. But of course, each week we like to end our show with some special Up Next picks. Oh my, okay. Carrying on. Some Up Next picks for other things that you can watch in the Apple TV app. So let's bring Roman back. Roman, let's start with you. What is your pick for this week?
Devin, my pick this week is Silent Hill Ascension. And this one is interesting because it's described as a collaborative and interactive streaming experience in which the viewer's decisions determine the outcome of the story. It's basically a spin-off of Konami's classic survival horror franchise, and the story follows 6 characters brought together by mysterious death in a haunted town. Ooh. Now, it's kind of reminiscent of Netflix Bandersnatch. It's geared toward video game, I think, where like it's not a live-action TV series. And so I'm very interested to see how they're going to blend these sort of TV show with a classic video game experience, if you will. The TV show will begin on October 31st, and it's going to be available on the App Store, also the web on ascension.com.
I like that pick. Something a little more interactive, something different, and something definitely spooky for this special spooky season. You can always airplay it up to the biggest screen in your house and enjoy it that way as well. Sigmund, what have you got for us this week?
Well, as everyone knows, it's Halloween this week, and that means a massive editorial basically going through all of the different kind of spooky treats that we have in store across the TV app. Some films, for example, that are more tailored towards younger eyes, some comedies from a horror perspective, and also your traditional horrors. So there's a vast array of movies and TV shows of the spooky variety to check out. This week, though, is a bit of a different recommendation from me because it's not spooky related. In fact, it is a new special coming from Matt Stone and Trey Parker on Paramount Plus of South Park. I have not watched South Park for a long, long time. The cartoon's been going for 30 years, and I'll have to be honest, both creators do push the envelope quite a bit, almost sometimes too much for my liking. However, based on what I've been told, this is going to focus a lot on artificial intelligence and its interference in movie and TV. A couple of friends of mine within the industry are very, very much looking forward to checking it out. And so we have planned a date to share play and watch that together on the big screen from the comfort of our own homes. So that is my pick this week. A bit of a different pick this week. And I think to close this week's picks, you have something of the animated kind, but something I think completely different to what South Park and Cartman and Kenny bring to the table.
Yeah, a little bit of a different intended audience, I think. This week, my up next pick, okay, I've got to do something about that lightning, is Coco, a Pixar film that came out in 2017. Now, of course, this week is Halloween, but it is also Day of the Dead, which is a holiday celebrated by a lot of folks. And this film, I think, is really special in that it really brings that celebration to the forefront. It's about a boy who steals a guitar from a crypt and finds himself cursed to the land of the dead, and he has to uncover a family mystery in order to return to the land of the living. And it's a really special movie. It's got some great music. So that's my pick this week, Coco on Disney+. And I think that's where we'll end this week's episode. Thanks again to Roman for joining us. And thanks to you for listening. Of course, we always welcome your feedback, so be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating and review there. You can always email the show or send us an iMessage to mrolfm@screentimes.net. Or you can find us on social media. We'll leave links to our social media in the show notes, as well as Roman's social media and the website for Sequel. We'll be back next week to talk Still Up and other Apple originals. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and if that lightning sound effects plays one more time, I'm going to really think that I'm cursed.
Happy Halloween!